let's see, what day are we today? Day
8.
Day 8. I'm looking around, Andrea, are we ready to roll here?
We
I know
are.
Senator Hemmert will come in, he's got some things he'd probably like to share, but in the interest of time, why don't we get rolling? So welcome to Day 8, media availability. We had a very good discussion about Medicaid today, so I imagine there may be a few questions, so I'm going to just go ahead and open it up.
So really, what does happen if you don't get these waivers?
Not much happens, actually. We have been assured that waiver number 1 will come probably before the end of our session. And waiver number 2, the long-term waiver, may take up to 6 months or in that neighborhood. We're betting on it. The best sources tell us yes. We have to believe someone. That's where we choose to believe.
But if you don't get it,
So the fiscal note, if you read it, we've been waiting for it, and that we released one over the weekend, and I think it was just updated during the session. But what we've done is we have funded the bridge, not for 6 months. We didn't fund it till we get in the next legislative session. The bridge is funded until June 30, 2020, which means that as we expand, which we are expanding, the expansion will be paid for 18 months. So we'll be back in legislative session next week. In fact, you know, talking about Medicaid, I'm kind of having this deja vu. I thought Groundhog's Day was Saturday, and I'm trying to figure out how to be back at it today. But anyway.
but it still seems like a hell of a bet, isn't it?
A what?
A hell of a bet if the feds don't grant your waivers.
Yeah, we'll be back in session. Well, what's the risk? We'll be in the same spot next year. I don't see any risk to it
But
if you pay for it.
why have that provision in the bill that wipes out Medicaid expansion if the waivers don't come through? Because you had said previously what you're saying now, that you'd be back in session and go to some kind of Plan B, but Plan B is just do away with it.
So
Just
Senator
read it right.
Christensen or Senator Hammond, I think there are 2 waivers. You want to touch on?
So, you know, so the first waiver, there's high confidence we get it granted. That's expanding at 7 to 30. We have had assurances from everyone under the sun that there is very high confidence level. Not only is that granted, but that we have expanded April 1st. That is our plan. We will expand April 1st. The second waiver, we also have.
So that one has a contingency, doesn't it?
Well, no, it's still waived, so there's still a waiver on it. But again, we have had assurances from everyone and anyone. There's this extremely high confidence level. That one is expanded, or excuse me, that one is granted without any, without a lot of heartache, and is implemented by April 1st, which is one of the reasons why we're trying to move this bill through at the beginning versus the end of the session, to allow our Department of Health time to apply for and receive that waiver so we can expand on April 1st. The second one is the more, and you know, Senator Christensen can speak to this too, but it is the one that we also have a high confidence level on that one again, but we don't think we get it by April 1st. We are hopeful, and I'd even say optimistic, we have it by year end, and even this expansion plan that we've been asked about, and how long does it go? Does it go until next year? We're actually hoping that it doesn't go until next year, because we will have granted the second waiver, and we're operating under a different Medicaid waiver regime. I don't know if Senator Christensen has anything to add there.
And people are going to say, but that waiver has never been granted to any other state. No other state has asked for it in the terms that we're asking for it.
So when does that provision that wipes out any Medicaid expansion kick in? Will it kick in if for some reason this initial waiver doesn't come through?
That's my understanding.
So there could not even be a bridge program under your bill the way it's written, if that first waiver doesn't come through.
It might be a cash program from the state until we can do something else about it. But the program says if we get no waiver, we can't implement that.
But can I speak to that briefly? Just Part of that, though, is working with CMS. And if there is a fail-safe, there is no motivation from CMS's perspective to grant any waiver. And so part of that is that. Now, worst case scenario, there's other levers that can be pulled. We can be called into special session, we can fund it a different mechanism, just all straight from the state. So there are other mechanisms. I think the bottom line that should be taken out of this, we have heard from the voters to expand Medicaid. We just voted to expand Medicaid. And our expectation is, going forward, that Medicaid in the state of Utah is expanded.
But only if, number one, you get a waiver for the bridge program, it's expanded, and as I understand it, you still have about 18 months of funding built in for that bridge program, correct? So, first waiver, you have up to an 18-month program, but if the second waiver doesn't come through, or the second set of waivers, that's it, there's no Medicaid expansion.
But as the President's already mentioned, we're back in session by then.
But why have that provision in the bill then? Why not just come back in this session? You can call yourselves back in there, right?
Yeah, we
I don't know
can.
for this.
Yeah.
And we probably would if we didn't get the waiver.
So why put that provision in the bill?
To disarm your question.
Yeah, because CMS, the expectation is CMS has no reason to, that provision is what gives CMS the motivation to work with us on getting the waiver grant.
So, the other point about those, you're talking about lines 190 to 194, which repeals HB 472, everything on Medicaid expansion that we've done so far, not as of this year or Prop 3, as of like previous sessions, which is why we won't have that amendment, because it's very scary to have that be a lost everything. The other thing with regards to those two waivers that they're talking about, so that's up to 100% of the federal poverty level and the caps, those are the two pieces that are the first trigger. And the concern is ACA as a law, as it passed, and that's a federal law, has nothing to do with the states, had as an intent of the law to cover up to 138% of the poverty level. So we're actually gonna be asking for a waiver that undoes the entire intent of ACA. And that's why there's also legal questions with regards to the possibility of not being within the intent of the law.
Senator Hammer.
But we also have a totally different administration in Washington than the one that passed the ACA.
And I'm talking about the courts in this case. Yeah.
But the courts are the ones granting waivers.
So there's other questions. Let's go back over here. Go ahead.
President, as you know, the Native American Caucus met this morning, and those populations and their tribal councils are counting on being exempt from the work requirement. Is that still carrying forth?
I don't know, Senator Christensen.
How many of the people below 100% poverty have food stamps? SNAP program. The work requirement is exactly the same as it is for the SNAP program. So if you qualify for food stamps, you qualify for you're doing the same work effort. There's no difference.
A question just on, Senator Kitchen raised on the floor, the idea of, by the actions that you're taking on Proposition 3 are sowing seeds of distrust among voters about the legislature. Do you have concerns that that here we have Prop 2 that was replaced, Prop 3 that's being modified here? Are you playing with fire with your own voters?
I've been against Medicaid expansion ever since it was brought up 10 years ago, and I fought against it. The reason it's being heard this year, especially with my bill, is because the people wanted it. They wanted a tax increase, they wanted Medicaid expansion, and that's what we're doing. They didn't fill in the proper blanks, we are filling in those blanks for them. They are not obligated to balance the budget, we are, and we're going to implement Medicaid expansion in a fiscally reasonable way where the public, the Proposition 3 did not provide for adequate funding of what it asked for.
So let me say that in a different way. Let's say that I passed a really good bill last year, and a proposition becomes a bill that's passed, becomes part of our statute. Should the next legislature not touch my bill? Because the Senate President passed it, and who would ever want to override the rule of the Senate President? I'm hopefully laughing, okay? because it happens all the time. And so when we pass legislation, or when a proposition is passed, it's a piece of legislation. We're doing our job. And hopefully those future legislators will change Senate Bill 96, if I got it right. And it'll get changed again. And that's what the process is. You're not gonna have any of this. Somebody said on the floor a day or two ago that we worked on Medicaid every session here and had some type of Medicaid bill. We'll have another one next year. And are we gonna say this bill we passed this year is sacred and can't be changed? I think that type of mentality lies in the face of what we're called to do. And we're trying to do our very best work. We're being as very thoughtful as we can. We're expanding Medicaid. And I have a question in my mind, how many people are on that 100 to 138? How many people are on platinum plans now? Any idea?
41,000 people.
41,000? And I think it may have been Senator Thatcher or someone else. Why do we, they've got a plan they like, why are we forcing them off that plan?
But there are 24,700 people in that gap that don't have
Well,
that
but
insurance.
let's-
Either they can't afford it, they don't know about it, for whatever reason, they don't have it,
But-
and they're not going to get covered.
But even in the population that has Medicaid coverage today, there's a high percentage of them that don't take advantage of it. Why?
30 to 40%.
So 30 to 40%. So we don't know that they really would take advantage of it, but we are forcing those people off that have a commercial plan they like. And why are we saying that we want to take 10% of it when the federal government's paying 100% of it now? And I think that is a question that perhaps somebody ought to ask them, the people that have those plans.
Can you talk about the fiscal note? There was a fiscal note out this morning that talked about the state leaving more than $1 billion on the table, and suddenly it was changed right before today's debate that suddenly doesn't talk about all the money that's being left behind.
Senator Hemmert, you were, Senator Christensen, oh yeah, both of you were.
I
So-
think you're very astute if you can figure out that fiscal note. I've never seen a more complex one in all my days.
I know both of you were working on it.
Is there a change to the cost factor to the state though, from the 72 million, is there a different estimate there on that new fiscal note?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The new fiscal note is a savings, an annual savings, starting in the year 2024, not necessarily starting, but in 2024, there will be $87 million savings, as opposed to $74 million in expenses in this coming year.
Okay, so that figure is the same in that 74?
So,
And to answer your
yeah,
question
what happened
directly.
there?
So our fiscal analysts have been working on this all weekend, as Senator Christensen.
And all last week.
And all last week. It's a very complicated issue. And there are, most bills hit one or two accounts. Medicaid doesn't. It is the largest part of our budget when you take the federal match dollars into consideration. It's extremely complicated. It hits numerous accounts within the state budget. And as they are going through and crossing all their Ts and dotting all their Is, they realized they were treating Senator Christensen's bill differently than fiscal notes they had already written for Senator Escamilla's second substitute, which I don't know if everybody's public, but,
Yeah, it was fun.
and
HB
for
210.
Senator.
House Bill, oh yeah,
House
210.
Bill 210,
Yeah.
which is the same bill.
Okay, same bill, yeah. So they had used a different approach on
Correct.
those bills than they did on the fiscal note for Senator Christensen's bill. And so I assume they realized this some point today because
This morning.
they grabbed us and told us, hey, it's changing. And they told us it was gonna get better from a cost perspective. And they also told us now they're using the same approach on both bills. So that's what happened. And it merely, someone realized they were not doing an apples to apples fiscal note comparison. And they recognized they needed to change that. Unfortunately, the timing was that it happened this morning.
So is the state leaving billions of dollars on the table with the federal government by changing up this program from full Medicaid expansion?
You know
Yes or no?
you know how I feel about that. I think the answer is no. I think those billions of dollars over a time period are coming into the state through the Affordable Care Act exchanges. They are not coming through the state budget. So that, if that's your question, yeah, they don't come through the state budget. They still come into the state though, and they come in at 100%. rather than 90-10. And so I unequivocally would say, no, we're not leaving that money on the table.
Have you done the math though to show if that is the same as the money left on the table in reality by not going to full Medicaid expansion? If this money that's not coming through the state,
I've
that's
seen-
going directly to subsidies?
I've seen the numbers Utah Decides put out, 2.5 billion over 5 years. If I run numbers on that same population as I have using, it's a range, right? Because I don't know the exact makeup of that population. But if I run those numbers, I can certainly run numbers that are larger than the ones they're putting out there and that are smaller. I don't know what's exactly right, but I think you can't say that, that for sure we're leaving money on the table, but it would take a more robust analysis than certainly I've done,
Is anyone going to do that analysis?
probably.
So what we've done, one more time, is we've expanded Medicaid. We've done it in a way that makes it more sustainable, meaning that we can pay for it longer, and that's fiscally responsible. And we've given people from 100 to 138 the ability to have a commercial program that's 100% paid for by the federal government, rather than 90-10.
They still have to pay.
Yeah, there's
They have to
subsidized.
pay,
Yeah.
but the 40,000 of them are paying today, and we're not gonna push them off, so that's a real advantage. If, I've heard people, they aren't gonna pay, well, 40,000 are, 2/3 of them are.
I wonder, just sort of one quick thing, I wonder for folks who might look on the exchanges and still find that premiums are unaffordable for them, for their family, how would you what would you tell somebody like that, I wonder?
The federal government pays 100% of the premium, don't worry about the premium, you know?
98%.
Oh, 98,
For
Oh, within the-
$22 per month.
yes, but they have to pay $22, so worry about the copay or the cost of the insurance. If it's 22 to 27 or $30, whatever it is, that is the cost to them. It's not the cost of the insurance. Am I understanding it right? So the cost is not the premium of the insurance, because the federal government pays 100%. That's exactly our point.
No, it's subsidized up to 98% or up to 2% of their income.
The 2%.
You're saying the same thing. They pay $22 to $27 per month for the insurance. It's capped out at 2.08% of their
Of their
income.
So they pay 98%, which is, leaves that balance of 25 to 27.
Why not bring into consideration of some of these fiscal analyses, things like long-term economic impacts, like less compensated care, effects of jail populations, and like the populations of people with mental disabilities, and some of those longer-term things that I often hear health economists talk about being some of the long-term savings with Medicaid programs.
Many of them already are being taken into account. And this morning in our social services appropriation, we talked about the savings from Prop 3 being involved, and they said we can't talk about my bill because it wasn't adopted yet. But savings from Prop 3 from moving people who are being taken care of under mental health by the counties will now have Medicaid coverage and will be able to be paid for. Those things are taken into account, but savings, it's an elusive figure, and I can put it all over the board where it looks great, but in fact, it's like trying to prove a negative. It's just, you can't get your fingers around it.
So I was unclear in Prop 3 whether it allowed for still a managed care. There were indications that maybe Prop 3 required pay for services. I know that in Senator Christensen's bill that we've allowed managed care to continue on. We've seen great savings for managed care. It's a part of our Medicaid program, and that's a big deal. So you bring up a great point. I think it's been addressed in this bill. Okay, so other questions? If not, we're going to move on to another subject, or we'll hopefully allow our people to get some lunch.
Let's do one more if there's,
Okay, well, one more online?
I
Or
don't think we
is there-
have any online.
Okay, anybody else? We'll take one more.
So I'm curious, the bill last year, Spendlove bill, it went up to 100% as well. So for voters who feel like they're not getting anything out of this sales tax increase they've taken on this hill, so how does your bill go beyond Spendlove's bill for them?
I voted against Spendlove's bill, as I have on all of the Medicaid expansions. Bruce, do you want to?
mean, I guess that's like, with the amendment.
I
Was
mean,
trying to
to
protect
maybe use
them.
Senator Hammer then, because you talked about how this is an attempt to respect what the voters asked for. Aren't we just returning effectively to the Spendlove bill?
I mean, it's a little bit different, but, I mean, I won't argue that nuance with you. The thing is, with Spendlove's bill, it did pass. We all knew that was a long shot and highly unlikely to, we thought, actually, that it was highly unlikely to receive a waiver. We don't think that's the case here today. So we've tweaked Spendlove's bill to be a bill that we actually think, or a waiver program that we actually think will get approved. And we're allowing the taxpayers to pay for it, including me, as a taxpayer, through their increase, because that's what they voted for. And they said, hey, expand under this, but understand, this bridge program is really, that's probably the piece that should be focused on. We are expanding Medicaid under a much more expensive model than the hoped for Spendlove waiver, or even the long-term waiver that we hope to get from Senator Christensen's bill. But this bridge is what lets us expand today, and that is what the taxpayers.
So the timeline of expansion is.
Yeah, that's right. So we're actually implementing it April 1.
Right.
So they're always, Spendlove's bill talked about the coverage gap. That coverage gap gets handled April 1.
Which was not happening under Spendlove's bill at all.
So, does that make sense?
I mean, it would have been implemented at some point.
If it had been approved.
If it had gotten approved.
But we wouldn't have implemented coverage through the coverage gap.
Okay. Thank you for being here again.
Thank you, Senator.
Groundhog Day was Saturday, so we're